That seems like it's working. So good evening, everyone. And our regular faces that we usually have here, new faces on here, welcome. And tonight's class is actually a different topic in the same series that we've been discussing, which is the Sefirat HaOmer, the time period that we are in now between Pesach, Passover, and Shavuot, from when the Jews left Egypt until the giving of the Torah. And tonight we're actually going to focus on a different take on the same time period, which is connected with a lot of the customs and traditions and laws that we have surrounding this time period. So can anyone tell me, what do we not do during this time? Listen to music, have weddings, cut hair. Very good. Anybody know the last thing? Very good. Not to buy new clothes. Exactly. This time period is a period of mourning, and we follow many of the laws that a person who is in mourning for the passing of a close relative follows. If somebody is during the time when they are mourning the loss of a close family member, they don't cut their hair, they don't attend weddings, listen to music, and they don't purchase new clothing. And the custom specifically, hi Fortuna, the custom specifically is clothing that is valuable, that brings you joy. So if you need to purchase a new uniform for work, or a pair of sneakers for exercise, something like that, that's a necessity, then that would be okay. Or if it's for the purpose, if somebody is dating for the purpose of marriage and they have a specific need for an outfit or something like that, then there would be leniency where it's okay. But in general, if somebody enjoys the feeling of opening the new Zara package or opening the new, the brand new paper of whatever package came, and then trying on the outfit and wearing it, that is not appropriate for this time period in the Omer, unless there are leniency. Many who do wear it on Shabbat first, so it's in honor of Shabbat. And the idea is that we don't make the blessing of Shehechianu during this time. And that would include new fruits, but normally people aren't eating new fruits in this season. So it's specifically with regards to this idea of the new clothing. So it's a time period of mourning. And the question really is, why are we mourning? If, as we spoke about extensively in our last classes, this is the time period of growth, this is the time period of self-development, when we're preparing for the receiving of the Torah, which is on Shavuot, it's a happy time. We're counting up towards the giving of the Torah. Why are we sad? So if we look at history, we see that this sad mourning period does not date back to the time when the Jews were counting the Omer leading up to the giving of the Torah. It actually came many, many years later. And the time period that has this sad mourning element that we are observing in this time is the death of the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva. So to put it into context, let me tell you a little bit about Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is one of the most fascinating characters in Jewish history, specifically in the time period around the temples, and the leaders of the generation in that time were such great Torah scholars, were such great leaders and immersed in Torah knowledge. And Rabbi Akiva was from a family of converts. He had no holy lineage. He was a complete ignoramus. He didn't even know how to read Hebrew until the age of 40. He was a grown man. And for much of his life, he was a simple shepherd. And he lived in the home of his master. He worked for a very rich man whose name was Kalba Savua. And Kalba Savua was a wealthy man who employed many servants and many workers. And he had this shepherd who was a kind shepherd and a very nice man and had very good qualities, but he was completely ignorant in Torah learning. And Kalba Savua had one beautiful daughter who was a very, very righteous girl. She was beautiful, she was smart, she was educated, she had everything going for her, and she came from the very wealthy and prominent family. And she decided she wants to marry this shepherd, Akiva. And her father is furious to the point that he disowns her. And she believes that he's the right one for her. And they get married. And they're living in abject poverty, to the point that at one point she actually sold her hair to provide food for her family. And they were living such difficult lives, but she felt that it was worth it. And she was constantly encouraging her husband, just try learning Torah. I see your potential. Just try learning Torah. And he felt like it was too late for him. And one day, the famous story, he's walking with his flock of sheep and he passes by a rock and he sees that there's an indentation in the rock. And he's wondering, what is this form in the rock? And he looks up and he sees that there's a drop of water that's dripping on the rock. And this drop of water must have been dripping for years because it actually formed an indentation in the rock. And at that moment, he stops and he says, if a drop of water can make a mark in a hard rock, Torah can penetrate my head as well. And he went to a yeshiva and he sat in the classroom with little children who were learning the Aleph-Bet. And he sat and he learned how to read Hebrew with the little children in the cheder. And then from there he progressed and he gained enough knowledge that he was ready to go to a yeshiva and study. But that would mean leaving his family. And his wife encouraged him, go learn. And of course, it was so difficult for her. But she pushed him to go, and he went. And he spent 12 years studying. And during that time, he became such a great Torah sage and such a great scholar that he amassed a tremendous amount of students. And he came back home after 12 years. And his wife said, if my husband would go back for another 12 years, I'd be okay with it. Look how much he's grown in his Torah knowledge. And he turned around and he went right back. And he spent another 12 years. And he came back home as the famous great sage, Rabbi Akiva, with 24,000 students. And his wife, whose name was Rachel, his wife came to greet him. And there were many students who were wondering, like, who is this woman coming to greet this great sage? Like, do you understand who this great rabbi is who's coming back? They didn't realize who she was. And he said, let her come through. All of you move out of the way. My Torah and your Torah is all in her merit. That's what a great sage he was. Story goes on to say that he actually went to see Kalba Savua, his father-in-law, who had no idea who his son-in-law had become. And he told him, if you would find out that your son-in-law, who you thought was a complete nobody, and you disowned your daughter for marrying this man, if he would be someone who learned Torah, would you take her back? Hello, come on in, grab some cookies, come sit down. Would you take your daughter back in and support her and everything? He said, even if he knew a little bit of Torah, I would be happy. And he said, I'm your son-in-law. And thank God she lived in beauty and wealth and happiness for the rest of her life. But it was hard during that time. It was very difficult during that time. And Rabbi Akiva amassed this huge following of students. And what was he known for? What do we say? It's actually one of the 12 Pesukim, the 12 verses and sayings from our teachers that the Lubavitcher Rebbe instituted. Those are 12 bases of foundational ideas in Torah that we should know and children should repeat constantly, and we should know these phrases by heart. One of them is Amar Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva says, Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Zeh klal gadol b'Torah, which means Ve'ahavta, you should love l'reacha, your fellow man, your fellow person, your friend, kamocha, like yourself. Zeh klal gadol b'Torah. This is an important rule and foundation of the Torah. Loving one another. Loving someone else the same way you love yourself. Now, what is the idea of loving someone the way you love yourself? Well, we all know our flaws. We all know our mistakes. We all know where we need to improve. And yet, we still love ourselves, or we should love ourselves. Some of us need to work on that more than others, but we love ourselves despite our failings. Loving another person the same way you love yourself means caring for another person, respecting another person, showing compassion for another person, and looking past their failings the same way you would do that for yourself. By the way, I read something very interesting. Rebbitzin in a Chabad community in Kansas, I believe, she posted something really, really nice and it resonated. She said, if you have to love other people the way you love yourself, it means you also have to love yourself the way you love other people. So in whatever way it goes, sometimes we have to give ourselves the grace that we extend to other people, but we're too hard on ourselves. And sometimes we need to extend grace to other people where we would be gracious with ourselves despite our faults. But this was his core teaching, which brings us back to the story of the Omer. Why are we mourning during this time period? Because Rabbi Akiva's 24,000 students were struck with a plague and they passed away. During this time period, now, for the sake of accuracy and understanding, it is important to know that there are different customs with regards to the mourning during this time. Over a period of 33 days, Rabbi Akiva's 24,000 students passed away. There are differences of opinion as to when that started. Some say it started from Pesach and it lasted 33 days. Some say it started on Rosh Chodesh, the first day of Iyar. And some say it started actually after Lag BaOmer until Shavuot, or the 3 days before Shavuot. Each of these opinions, depending on which tradition your community follows, you may observe these customs from a different time. There are some who start this custom from right after Pesach. There are some that start the custom right after Shavuot and go only until Lag BaOmer, and some that go all the way until Shavuot. By the way, the Chabad custom is we just keep all of it. So we start from Pesach until Shavuot. But all the customs and all the traditions in every community is in consensus that the day that there was no death was on the 33rd day of the Omer, which is when we celebrate Lag BaOmer next week, Tuesday. We'll get to that discussion in a minute. So what happened that there was this terrible plague? Why were these students all literally dropping like flies? The entire nation, the entire tribe of students wiped out because they weren't respecting each other. The Talmud tells us, Shelo nahagu kavod zeh bazeh, which literally means that they did not behave respectfully towards each other. Now let me ask you a question. First of all, it's a lot of people. There's a lot to unpack about this. Let me ask you something. If Rabbi Akiva's core teaching was loving another person the same way you love yourself, ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, real and true Ahavat Yisrael, and these were his 24,000 students and followers who lived by his teachings. These were each prominent Torah scholars in their own right, who were following the teachings of their teacher, their leader, their guide. How is it possible that they were not respectful to one another? How could it be? if you think about it, the area that their teacher spoke about most would not be the area that they would have struggled with all to the point of being punished with a plague. I mean, every teacher has certain things that they try to teach, and they have a whole curriculum, but then there are also the values that you impart to your students. I always tell my students, and for those of you who don't know, I teach 5th grade girls as well. And I always tell my students, and I tell their parents, and I always say the same thing across the board. Whether or not you remember a word of content from anything in my curriculum, I want you to walk out, number one, feeling that you can learn, that you have confidence. And number two, that you're always kind to other people. Also, that the classroom is always perfectly clean before we start learning. Now, let me tell you something. I can tell you that many of my students have come back to me years later. I actually had students that are graduating that this year, the graduating class, they were my first students since I moved here. And they repeat these things back to me. And one of them actually told me, it was very funny. She's like, I still remember you walking into the class and you saying, the floor looks colorful. It's not supposed to. And till this day, she always says, I remember the classroom, doesn't matter who teacher was, but when Mushka Dalfin walked in, the classroom always had to be clean. Now, let me tell you something. It's not something superior that I was able to do that. It was because I said the exact same thing every single day. That's how it got drilled into their heads, because they say the same thing every single day, and I don't let them get away with anything else, because it's an important value that your learning environment should be a respectful, clean environment. That's what breeds confidence, and to know that whatever you do, all of these things, but it's a matter of saying it over and over. Rabbi Akiva said this over and over and over, to the point that the phrase quoting him starts with Amar Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said, he's part of the quote. How could it be that they all died because of a lack of respect? So let's actually see what they were doing. You know what they were doing? Did you think I was going to give a class with a question and no answer? You've been here long enough. So what happened? Rabbi Akiva would give a class, a lecture, a shiur Torah. And as happens, each student would understand the teachings of the teacher from their own perspective. And they all thought that they were right. And because they had a love for each other, so deeply ingrained within themselves, they deeply cared for each other the same way they cared about themselves, because that's what their teacher taught them. They couldn't fathom that their peer would have incorrectly understood an important teaching that Rabbi Akiva had taught them. Because they cared so deeply about each other, they wanted to make sure that their fellow students had understood it properly. The problem was that they each understood it from their own perspective and were trying to make sure that their friends were understanding it from their perspective, because my way is right, and I love you so much, and I care for you so deeply, and I want you to understand it the same way I do. And that's where the disrespect seeped in, because they were unable to look at another person's differing opinion and different understanding and say, we can both disagree and still respect each other. That was where there was a lack of respect. They cared for each other so deeply. They loved each other. They really would give their shirt off their back for their friends if they needed it. They would give charity. They would do kindness. They had really absorbed that teaching. The problem was they didn't respect each other's differences. That was where the lack of respect came from. And that became so damaging, because they stopped seeing each other for who they were and only saw their differences. And that's when they stopped respecting each other. It's a very, very large amount of people. And that is why the entire Jewish world mourns their passing every single year. Because if you think about it, there have been many, many tragedies throughout our history. And we have days of mourning in our calendar. We have Tisha B'Av, where we mourn the destruction of the temple. And we have the 17th of Tammuz, where we mourn the breach of the walls and the beginning of the destruction of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. But that's one day. For every single year, a large period of time, we all observe rituals of mourning as if it was a family member that died within the year. That's very extreme. But the reason we do it, and we don't do that for other tragedies, is because it's not just about mourning their loss. It's also about making sure that something like that never happens again. Making sure that we never end up in a situation again where we lose sight of each other's value and only see the differences that we have. Because we're all going to walk out of here tonight with a different idea in mind. We're each going to interpret things in our own way, especially someone who is, a great Torah scholar. They understand the Torah from their reference of learning. And, if you think about it, you go to a conference and there's hundreds of people in the room, or thousands of people in the room, or even just 20 people in the room. And there's a lecturer. Everybody's going to walk out of there with a different thing that resonates with them. And that's okay. That's good. Because that means that it was relatable to you. And we're all different. So different things are going to be relatable to each one of us. But if we have to make sure that everybody else walks away with the exact same lesson as us, then we're going to really lose respect. But if we can understand that this idea resonates with you, it doesn't really pertain to my life, but this idea really influenced me positively. And that thought was really inspiring for somebody else. And we can still have a wonderful conversation about it without arguing over what difference of opinion we have, without disagreeing to the point of losing respect for one another. That's something that we need to constantly keep in mind and constantly remember, because each one of us are different. And we can use those differences to inspire us to learn new things from each other, or we can use those differences as separations to distance ourselves from other people. When you meet somebody who's not like you, one of two things happen. You either feel like I have nothing to talk to them about because we have nothing in common, or they're so fascinating to speak to. There's so many new things I can learn, right? The question is what you want to do. Do you want to find commonality and learn new things? Or do you want to only stick with people who are exactly the way you are and distance yourself from anybody who's different? Sometimes it's easier to distance ourselves from people who are different than us. And that is why every single year we need to feel the pain of the passing of these students so that we learn the lesson of embracing one another and respecting each other for our differences. It reminds me of a passage in Pirkei Avot that we read recently. And during this time period between Passover and Shavuot is also the time when we read the Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our fathers. And if anybody's interested in learning more, for those of you who remember, last year we did a wonderful series on Pirkei Avot. It's actually all on YouTube. You can watch the classes. And I love referring back to it because it is such a powerful learning to really delve deep into the lessons that we can learn from Pirkei Avot. So one of the teachings in the Mishnah is the world stands on three things. That the world is supported on three foundational elements: on Torah learning, on prayer, and on acts of kindness. And each of these three things are very important. Each of these things have a lot of value, and we're not going to get into all the details. But if we think about the fact that the world relies on these three core elements, but each one of us personifies maybe one of these things in a different way. Some of us are more academic and more into learning. Some of us are naturally more givers and are more outgoing and are constantly seeking opportunities to do kindness. Others are more introspective and prayer is more their thing. Now, of course, the Mishnah is teaching us that we should try to incorporate all of these three things into our lives, but we also have to remember that each one of us is predominantly going to focus on one of these areas. So when we see somebody who focuses on a different area, we can either think to ourselves, well, let's say I'm more of a Torah learner, which happens to be true because I'm a teacher and I love to learn. And Torah learning plays a predominant part of my life. Acts of kindness, thank God, does as well. And prayer is a little bit more challenging for me. And it's something that I have to work harder on. So I can either look at it and say, that's an area that I need to work on. Or I can look at it and say, well, I love learning Torah. Everybody else should also love learning Torah. So how could it be that you are not learning as much Torah as me? How could it be that you're not teaching as many Torah classes as me? That would be ridiculous to say. Rather, what's the right thing to say is, I'm so grateful that there are other people who are different than me, who are more connected to God through prayer, because they're doing their part to hold up the world. Because remember, the world needs all three in order to stand. So if each one of us is predominantly focused in one area more than the others, we need to remember that the differences are what balance the world. Because if one of the legs would stop holding up the world with the same strength, it would be quite lopsided. And obviously we're not talking literally in the sense of three pillars hanging up holding up the world, but it's a good visual to think about it. If you had a ball on three legs and you pull out one of the legs, the ball is going to go bouncing down. Each of the legs need to be equally strong, equally tall, equally positioned. So we need each other with our differences. We rely on each other to have different strengths than we do. And when we focus on that, that's when we can embody the lessons of Rabbi Akiva. And unfortunately, his students were not able to absorb the lesson and they perished. And it was tragic. It was truly, truly a tragic time.
What was going on and why?
It happened very, very quickly. He was constantly trying to imbue this idea into his students. And in this area, they failed. And during the time when it was happening, it's important, and I'm glad you asked that question, because it's very important to understand that when someone's going through a tragedy, we never blame people for the tragedies they're going through. No one is ever to blame for their own tragedies. However, after the fact, there are lessons that can be learned. During that time, it would be quite tragic when there's a plague that's rampant through the yeshiva, because remember, they were all learning together. So they were all catching it from each other and they were passing away, getting, think of it, God forbid, as like a virus where people were catching it and passing away. And unfortunately, the events several years ago made that not such a far-fetched idea, something that can spread so quickly and cause so much loss. No one at that point could have or had the right to ever say, if you would only be respectful, you wouldn't have died. Or to tell their family members, if your dad would have been respectful, well, he wouldn't have died. That's never okay to say. So it's not for that time period. But in retrospect, our sages teach us, how can we learn from this experience to make sure it doesn't happen again? This was their behavior, and this is what we can learn from that. So it's not something for that time. And can you imagine the loss it was for Rabbi Akiva? All of his students. And he rebuilt with 5 students. 5 students he rebuilt. And that's part of why we mark this loss so profoundly, because it almost cost the loss of Torah teaching. 24,000 students. Each one, the yeshiva, they were in pairs of students because each student learned with chavrusa. They had their study partner, and it says there were 12,000 pairs. And the amount of Torah teaching that was lost, and the amount of potential Torah that could have been learned by all of these scholars who became teachers in their own right. 100%, 100%. The amount of loss, it almost cost Torah knowledge to stop being spread out. And Rabbi Akiva required such strength to rebuild. And he did with 5 students. That's a good question. I'm really bad at numbers, so I'm going to find out and get back to you. The question was, how old was he during this time? Well, let's put it this way. He started learning Torah at 40, and it was at least 24 years later than that. So 40 plus 24 is 64, but it might have been longer than that. So it was around that time period. He was definitely advanced in his life. And if we think about it, the fact that he rebuilt was because he understood that Torah knowledge and Torah study and the continuity of Torah cannot be lost because of lack of respect. It cannot be lost because of that. We need to make up for it, which brings us to next week. Next week, Tuesday, is Lag BaOmer. Lag BaOmer is the day when all of the mourning stops. For some, it stops and they don't continue after. There are different customs. In the traditional Chabad custom, we continue with the laws of mourning after Lag BaOmer until 3 days before Shavuot. But that was the beginning of the class. We don't cut hair. We don't listen to music. We don't get married, have weddings, and we don't buy new, expensive, beautiful clothing. And if you bought it because, by the way, it's good to know, because if you bought it because there's a sale, you're allowed to, but you shouldn't wear it. Because if you would lose the opportunity to buy it, like if there's a sale, you can, but you shouldn't wear it, or you should keep it for Shabbat. Or you can wear it on Lag BaOmer, and then you can wear it after because it's not new anymore. So that's a great question. I'll get to that in a minute. I'll get to that in a second, okay? So Lag BaOmer is the day when the plague halted. And we celebrate this with great joy. It's also the day of the passing of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was one of the 5 students of Rabbi Akiva who rebuilt that legacy. Rabbi Shimon was one of those 5 students. And if you thought Rabbi Akiva's life was dramatic, meet Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was living during the times when the Romans were ruling over Israel after the destruction of the temple. Rabbi Akiva lived through the destruction of the temple, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was leading the Jewish people with his colleagues during the time period right after that. And because of his perceived treason against the Roman Empire, he was sentenced to death and he had to go into hiding. And he actually hid in a cave with his son, who was also a Torah scholar, not his wife. His wife wasn't at risk of life. His wife wasn't being sentenced to death. The third person. That's a good point. Well, we'll get to that in a second. So, no. So in the cave, there were the 2 of them, Rabbi Shimon and his son, Rabbi Elazar. And they actually survived miraculously because a carob tree sprouted near the cave, and a stream of water was flowing right by the cave, even though they were in a desert area. And they stayed there for 12 years. And that was how they survived that, escaping from death. And they learned Torah together in the cave for 12 years. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai actually wrote the Zohar. The Zohar is the original book of Kabbalah and mysticism, which is the basis of Hasidic thought. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai passed away on the day of Lag BaOmer. And before he passed away, he asked that the day of his passing should not be a day of sadness. It should be a day of joy and celebrating. And it's a day of miracles. It's a day of mystical energy. It's a day of spiritual, elevated inspiration that you can tap into on that day. It's a day when people who are praying for any type of miracle, any type of blessing, specifically can pray for that on that day. And it says that you can rely on Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai to make miracles on Lag BaOmer. You can rely on him because he'll always come through for you. And we celebrate this on the day of Lag BaOmer, which we celebrate. It is next week. It starts Monday night and continues all through Tuesday. And we celebrate with dancing and singing and celebration, specifically celebrating Jewish pride and celebrating our connection to the Torah, which was almost lost. But thank God on Lag BaOmer it stopped. And there were those 5 students who survived and who remained and who were able to rebuild the yeshiva and rebuild the Torah knowledge and all of that. So on the day of Lag BaOmer, we're celebrating the fact that we have risen from the ashes and that we have learned respect and we have learned tolerance and we have learned joy and unity. And if we're going to celebrate that, we better put that into practice. We need to embody it as well, which is why it's customary to celebrate as a community. By the way, next week on Tuesday, we're having a community barbecue. We're celebrating all together in the spirit of unity, bringing everyone together because that is the beauty and the joy of Lag BaOmer. That is what we're celebrating. We're celebrating the fact that it doesn't matter what we look like on the outside. It doesn't matter what our opinions are. It doesn't matter what our any political affiliation, any religious affiliation, any background, any color, anything. We are all united. And our differences are what make us beautiful. Last week, we discussed the idea of Tiferet, the characteristic of balance, which is beauty. The differences are what make us a beautiful, cohesive group. A beautiful painting is not just a solid one color. It's many colors that work together in harmony. Beautiful music is not just one note that's repeated over and over. It's many different notes that work cohesively to create a beautiful melody. And a beautiful community is when we are all so different, and yet we cohesively unite together, not to all be exactly the same, but to love each other exactly the same and celebrate our differences in the process. And that is what we learn both from Rabbi Akiva and his students and from Rabbi Shimon as well. You had a question, yes.
So one question that I want to clear up is the 5 people that you're saying he rebuilt were they people that did not die and pray, is that it? But they are his students?
Yes.
And so with them, then they started attracting more students again and bringing back, is that it?
Exactly. And his students became teachers who were teaching as well and building the community again. His 5 students went on to become teachers.
Going after we go back, after passing through COVID, it makes me wonder, could they have died through the plague like that? Or get one, like you said, that it was a virus, and then you explained that during that you don't come to the conclusion exactly they died because they didn't respect each other.
Right.
Because evidently they were all in the same school and got the same virus.
100%. It's actually interesting. I was reading when I was preparing for the class today. I read, and it's not something that I've ever seen before. I don't know if it would be the equivalent of what we would call it today, but the plague that they had was called something equivalent to like croup, which nowadays is not. Thank God, it's not a fatal illness, but some sort of breathing, plague. You know what? You're not terribly wrong.
But did you talk about the fact that it was school diet?
It was specifically in that community. Whether or not there were others who also died as well is not recounted in history. It's possible, but it's not historically.
I mean, it just hit me. I got scared about it.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's very interesting.
You're completely safe, no matter why did it hit only them, maybe. You know.
There are always lessons that we should be learning. Specifically, in our tradition, when it comes to the Omer, this is the idea that we focus on. Especially, I'll take it in a second, especially since we are living in a time now where more than ever, people know about each other's lives. If there was ever a time of oversharing, we are living in it, right? People know everything about each other's lives. They shouldn't. You guys all know my opinion on this matter, ladies. I don't believe that everything that happens in your house needs to be broadcast on your social media platform. And every conversation that you have with your friend should take place in the comment section for everyone to read. And every video call that you have with your sibling should be an Instagram live for everybody to watch. I don't ascribe to that idea. I believe that there's beauty in sharing with others, and there's beauty in maintaining privacy, not secrecy, but privacy and intimacy and beauty in your in-person environment, not necessarily in your online environment. But the fact that this is the world we live in, we need to be aware of that. The more you know about someone else's life, the more you're going to be able to find things you don't like about them, because you're going to know more things about them. So you will find more things to judge them. Let's just say that social media didn't become less judgy. We became a lot more judgmental about other people's lives when their whole lives are splashed across our screens. We become more judgmental unless, and this is a big unless we are actively working to find the positivity in the people we see. When you see pictures of someone's fancy vacation, which, by the way, just not on topic, but just so you know, imagine there's a grid full of a bunch of colored dots. Each one is a different color, okay? You're only going to see one of those circles, so you're going to see one color. What you're going to imagine is that their entire life is all that color. Keep in mind that everyone's life has so many different parts of it, and they're only showing you a 15-second reel of their entire life, and it's very curated. So don't judge people based on their profile and the status that they show you, because there's so much more that they're not showing. They shouldn't be showing you every part of their life, but we shouldn't judge people based on the parts that they do show us. That being said, when we do see someone's vacation or family pictures or big promotion or a big accomplishment or anything else that we see, we can either look at it and say, oh, come on, why did she do this? Or why is she wearing that? Or coming off the Met Gala, why is she wearing that? And what's going on? And what, all of this stuff. And the judgments come so freely if you let them. Or we can find positive things to say about each other. I'm so happy for her that she's able to do this. I'm so happy for him that he was promoted in this area. You can be happy for someone even if you don't agree with them, even if you wouldn't have made choices, even if you don't want your life to be the same way. And also you could be happy with them if you wish you had that life and you don't, or you wish you would have had the same opportunity, but you weren't provided with that, or whatever it is. But we can find those differences and celebrate them and be respectful of each other. Talking about Pirkei Avot, one of the important things that we see in Pirkei Avot is there are so many different rabbis, so many Talmudic scholars, and each one teaches a different lesson. And if we look at the historical timeline of all of these rabbis and all of these teachers, when the Mishnah was being written, all of these scholars shared their thoughts. And they're all very different ideas, some of them even contradicting each other. In the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, which is in the Ethics of Our Fathers. It's the part of the Mishnah that we read every Shabbat between Passover and Shavuot.
The Mishnah is all Pirkei Avot?
No, Pirkei Avot is one tractate of the Mishnah. There are many, many tractates. And it's a part of the Mishnah that talks about ethics and morals and lessons that we can learn. There's 6 chapters. And each chapter has lots of different sub-chapters. And all of these rabbis taught different ideas. And during that time period, there were 2 great sages, Hillel and Shammai. And Hillel and Shammai are known in the Talmud for their arguments. They're known for their differences of opinion. In fact, they rule on Jewish law differently in some instances. And there's recorded debates that they had with very difference of opinion. The most famous one being the manner in which we light the menorah on Hanukkah. We can either light the menorah on Hanukkah starting with 1 candle and going up to 8, or there's a difference of opinion about starting from 8 and going down to 1. And the opinion and the school of thought of Hillel was one way, and the school of thought of Shammai was another way. And their argument is recorded in the Talmud, and then the halachic ruling was given, which is the ruling that we follow, and that is that we light from starting from 1 to 8, which we know in the way that we light the Hanukkah menorah. But their argument was recorded. Now, in the Torah usually recounts things that we can learn from. So why are we reading and learning about arguments? Because the Torah is teaching us how to argue respectfully. You do not have to agree with everyone. That's what means you have your own mind. That's what it means to have your own mind, is that you're not always going to agree with everyone. Now, of course, there are certain things that are not up to interpretation. You can choose to listen or not listen, but facts are facts, whether you agree with them or not, right? But then there are interpretations that you can choose to agree with or not. And it doesn't matter if you think somebody is right or wrong. You have to be able to disagree respectfully and understand that a person's opinions are not defining their value as a person. And so even if you don't agree with their opinion, you can still be friends with that person. You can still have a nice meal with that person. You might have to decide that you're not going to discuss certain topics, and that's okay. You can agree to disagree, or if it always leads to confrontation, agree not to talk about it. Now, it doesn't necessarily work in a marriage, so that's why it's important to discuss the big topics before you choose to marry someone, because that could make things a little difficult. But I've had so many conversations with people who said, you know, this person has a different political opinion than me, and I can't talk to them anymore. I can't have a family dinner because we disagree on whatever political topic. And honestly, I was so saddened by that. I wasn't saddened by the fact that they had differences of opinion. Of course they have differences of opinion. I was saddened by the fact that they only saw people for their opinion. And they couldn't understand that we can respect each other even if we don't agree on a certain topic. Isn't that sad? That's what happened to the students of Rabbi Akiva. And we see this nowadays so often, and it's something that we have to actively work on. Being able to, like we said before, look at people and see their value and love them the way we love themselves, the way we love ourselves, which does not mean love them only if they are like ourselves. It means love them despite their faults, despite their challenges, despite everything, and still respect them the same way we respect ourselves, and we should respect ourselves despite our shortcomings and despite our faults and despite our mistakes. That is what we learn from this time. So whether you are observing the laws of the Omer or not, we should definitely be keeping in mind this idea. And if you're just learning about these laws for the first time, you can keep them from now. If you're keeping it only till Lag BaOmer, it's just a few days. We don't listen to music unless it's for work purposes or if it's in the background. We don't listen to music. We don't cut our hair. And by the way, that only means getting haircuts. It doesn't mean taking care of any other intimate hair removal. And we don't have weddings, and we don't purchase new clothes. If you purchased it, keep it in your closet for another time. And what we do, because what we don't do is not the only important thing, because if we lose sight of what we're supposed to be doing, then all of the laws of mourning fall to the wayside, and they don't have the effect that they're supposed to have. What we should be doing every time we want to listen to music and we don't listen to music, or for me personally now, a cappella music is allowed, and there's a lot of beautiful a cappella Jewish music out there. And every time I listen to it, as much as I enjoy it, I always realize what's lacking. It's missing music. But that's the point. We're supposed to realize what's lacking. We're supposed to recognize that there's a lack of respect and actively work to repair it. The same way we don't listen to music during the time period of the commemorating the destruction of the temple, because we're supposed to realize there's something lacking. We don't have a temple. Now is the time where we're supposed to remember there's something lacking. We don't have true love and unity. And then we have to actively work to repair that. So, l'chaim, to being able to learn from each other and respect each other's differences, and learn to not just coexist, but be connected, because that's really what it's all about. So l'chaim to that, and Bezrat Hashem, I look forward to seeing you all next week, for those of you who will be celebrating with us, with a community, 5 o'clock in Normandy Isle Park. Delicious barbecue, activities, fun times, good music, we'll be enjoying together. Also, before I take any questions, I want to let you know about a few upcoming things. So first of all, we have the Lag BaOmer event. And then in 2 weeks, Bezrat Hashem, in 2 weeks, we are going to be having our pre-Shavuot ladies event. It's coming closer. I already started placing orders for things, which makes me super excited. And we are going to be having a floral workshop, delicious dairy dessert bar. If you like cheesecakes, come hungry. Let me tell you, it's going to be delicious and really great time. If you've been to our events of the past, you know they're worth coming to. It's in 2 weeks on Wednesday. Please, please, please reserve. I need to give a number to the lady who's doing the workshop and let her know how many flowers to bring and all of that. So please reserve. And if you'd like to sponsor, let me know. If you would like to share the flyer with a friend, let me know. You can just take it from the chat, or I can send it to you. And I really look forward to seeing all of you. And Bezrat Hashem, coming up with Shavuot, I will keep you posted on what we are going to be having for Shavuot. So on that note, any questions? Good question. So the event next week is on Tuesday. Wednesday night, we are having a class next week, Bezrat Hashem. I look forward to seeing you all. We will be finishing the Sefirat HaOmer series. And then the following week, we're going to have our pre-Shavuot evening. The week after that is the day before Erev Shavuot. I don't think we'll be having a class that night. If we do, I'll let you know. And then we will resume after that. One more thing. Now, oh, it's still recording. Okay, so if anybody hears this after, as well. I had this thought to do it, and I'm only going to do this if there's enough interest. So let me know. You don't have to tell me now, but you can message me after if you're interested. I am thinking of doing a summer course for anyone who's here during the summer. It is going to be a bat mitzvah course for women who never celebrated a bat mitzvah. It's going to be a beautiful course. Different topics. It's going to be probably during the day course. So I'm doing it during the summer. If I have a group of ladies, we can figure out a time that works best. We'll figure out a time. It will not be in the place of the Wednesday evening class, but we'll work the schedule. I have a few options, and if I have enough interest, we'll take a vote on the times that work, and we'll figure something out. It'll be an 11 course series. So it'll start Bezrat Hashem, after Shavuot, and it'll go through the summer. I have not worked out all the details yet. We might do twice a week for a shorter amount of time if that works. If there's enough interest, you'll let me know, and then I'll plan the schedule. There will be a fee for the course. You will be getting a manual. It will be beautiful, and it will end with a bat mitzvah ceremony for all the ladies.
Oh, wow.
So if that's something that you're interested in being part of, please let me know. Registration for that course will be opening after the event, after the floral event. So if you're interested, you can let me know by then, and then we can take it from there. If you've never celebrated your bat mitzvah and you'd like to, if you celebrated your bat mitzvah but feel like you need to renew your bat mitzvah, you're welcome to join. A lot of these topics, we're going to be taking Jewish topics that we may have covered already and going much more in depth from a place of real in-depth learning and understanding, and really getting to the source and the crux of certain ideas in Judaism. And I'm very excited about it. So if anyone's interested, let me know. On that note, now for real, if anyone has any questions, please, you asked the question, I told you to wait for it after. Yes. And for those of you on mute on Zoom, if you want to unmute yourself, please do. About the hair. So you are allowed to have your hair cut on Lag BaOmer. So you know, the Chabad custom is only boys who are having their upsharon, they're having their 3-year-old cut their hair. Otherwise, we wait until the day of Erev Shavuot. But many, many communities do. That's the full answer. Do what you choose with it. I mean, question.
No, I'm listening.
Okay. No, I see you
Yeah.
unmuted yourself, so I was wondering if you had a question.
Yeah.
But okay, great. Well, ladies, thank you all for joining. Bezrat Hashem, I will see you all next week, hopefully on Tuesday at the barbecue, and whether or not you're there Wednesday night, we'll be having class again. And Bezrat Hashem, this recording will be uploaded. Excuse us for last week. Before we cut Fortuna, I want to tell you that we have dedicated the class in the memory of your mother-in-law. Do you want to share her name with us? Sorry, you're on mute. There you go.
Emma Bat Zoila.
Her neshama, her soul should have the highest elevation, and your family should have comfort and only joy, and the beauty of the family that she leaves, which we are very fortunate to know you all. And we know, I never met her, but I can tell you that just knowing your family is a testament to her beauty and her strength and the legacy that she leaves. So she should be a source of comfort, and Hashem should give you strength during this time. We're thinking of you.
Thank you.
And welcome back.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody on here.
Good night.
Good night.